Thank you for your attention. We will now be starting the Summarising Plenary session, overlooking the outcome of all session ICEF 2023. First, I would like to introduce the moderator, Mr. Tanaka Nobuo, a chair of ICEF Steering Committee and former executive director of the International Energy Agency. I would like to ask Mr. Tanaka to moderate the session. Mr. Tanaka, if you please.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the whole lineup of the steering committee members of the ICEF. I'm sorry to say we are not so young as the preceding panel. So old man's panel can compete with the young generation panel is a very interesting challenge for all of us. By the way, the issue here is I will ask all the members of the steering committee, what is your take from the whole session? Especially some of them are moderating their session, but I will ask each of you 3 minutes to summarize what is your take from the ICEF 2023. And then the next question, of course, is what we are going to do in the next decade. But before asking this question, I just wonder, I think the people here has already participated in a special session with Václav Smil and Michael Lieblich, moderated by David Sandaro, right? And Ismail, yes. I just ask you, of course, Václav is coming. Maybe I should have asked this before he came, but I have no idea. It's impossible to convince Václav to change his mind. But certainly, I want to know how did you find the discussion between Václav and Michael and David and Ismail? Which side do you agree, or which side are you convinced more? You agree with more Václav? Or you agree with Michael, Ismail, and David? I just want to have some, let's say, exercise. Those who think that Václav won the discussion, please raise a hand. Okay, just one. Those who think the discussion with Michael, Ismail, David won, please raise your hand. Okay, so 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Wait, okay, let's take it our reference, and I'll ask the question, what is your take from the ICEF 2023? Let's start with Changhwa. Going all through the direction. Everybody, 3
minutes. Okay, sure. I will be quick. There were a few things, actually, key takeaways for me. The first level, I think there were 3 things. One is Mr. Astronaut, when he talked about sharing his sort of experience in, flying, sort of traveling in the space, watching the blue marble, the planet. Fragile but resilient. I think that strikes me really, really deeply in my mind. And then, of course, moving on to the session, I had the privilege to lead the moderation, which is about innovative policymaking. These cartoons by Ambassador Pickett that really depicts the reality, the world on this planet, on the ground we are experiencing now. But really most fascinating is really the session I just moderated with the younger generation there. You could tell the younger generation are already in it. Maybe their parents, their great-parents made this sort of Paris Agreement or the rules, whatever, even before some of them were born, but somehow they are already in it because looking into 2050, the burden, the task actually to deliver those targets, commitments will be on their shoulder. That's the first layer of my takeaway. The second layer, mostly coming down to the session I moderated, the policy session, I think we all agree, as our chairman mentioned just earlier, politics, policy making, so crucial. So innovative policy making happens to be the key in terms of holding all the pieces together, because without that process, we cannot really address all the differences, divergence, rivalries, whatever, at all different levels there. So the session I led the moderation pretty much illustrated sort of the actions on the ground. We have a major economic bloc, EU. We have a country, Ecuador, from the south, that's sort of at higher level. Then getting down to the disruptive technology innovation, the policies, technologies, we realize actually one thing, I think key message I took away from that process is not just one way, say government made the decision, put the money, you guys do the research, rather the outcome of the research, particularly around the cost and performance, plays a big role to provide the evidence for legislators, lawmakers, policymakers to really accelerate actually the deployment of the process. And then, of course, we need innovators, right? We have this sort of exciting innovators, technology innovators at different levels in different parts of the world. Actually, that's really fascinating. See, we are putting the things together, really trying to drive the solution. The third point, I come from China, so I do want to bring more China perspective into this process. Throughout this last 2 days there, like it or not, this national security, supply chain security issue, China, the geopolitics, US, China, whatever, is always with us. It's never been gone, disappear, whatever. I do want to bring more attention actually to the ICEF platform, the audience, our steering committee there. Like it or not, China is already playing a significant role in terms of really transform manufacturing clean technology into products, services there at a cost-effective level that could be deployed. We're already doing that in China. China is already supplying many parts of the world. Somehow, if we do not address the geopolitical rivalry there, it's going to be really difficult, honestly, for us to deliver the timeline, say, 2030 and 2050 there. Looking into the future, there are a few things I would like to to see more attention from ICEF there. One is really around the supply chain security. We do have the biggest opportunity to transform supply chains, not only so geopolitically, but to really look at the scope 3 emissions, their decarbonization process, particularly deploying tools like AI, traceability, transparency, accountability there. I think China in that landscape can really also transform with the rest of the world in there as well. I think there are other issues like a circular economy, whatever, they're all in there. So I would like to see more attention paid to supply chain security transformation there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chang-Won. Do you think we have to invite a politician or innovative politician, if any, but do you think that is necessary for the ICEF to do more?
Not too many. If one or two, I think that's fine. I don't think you want to just listen to politicians preaching whatever. So very controlled manner. I wouldn't say no, objection, whatever to that, but I don't think you want to get too many politicians on the stage. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
Thank you. And yeah, I was just going to mainly talk about the panel I moderated, which is GX Together, which is really about the just transition, which is actually quite a complicated topic for people to really define. But we looked at it from a sector and also from a geography perspective. And I suppose, post the discussion, my takeaway was it's really about inclusivity. And the phrase that was used that struck me was the sort of stranded humans message, which we talk about stranded assets. This is about stranded humans. So this is about bringing everybody with us. And there were two key points really made around how to do that, I think, on the panel. So one was around education, and it's come up a few times in other discussions. But having the skills, understanding these new technologies, these new industries, understanding that these are new jobs that can be created. So thinking about skills programs and how to scale education, because obviously the pace of of educational progress is still slow. So we're waiting for graduates. There's a few more courses. It's moving forward, but not fast enough to educate people. Actually, as a business, we found running education programs is almost the best thing you can do for clients. They really appreciate it. There's a lot of people in very powerful jobs who don't have the time to re-educate themselves, and so education seems like one of the key solutions. And to this as well, bringing along people in conventional industries or in countries where these industries don't exist, the clean industries. And then the second thing we talked around finance. And there was, I suppose, the key thing that came out of the finance was you really need, looking at things from a transaction perspective, each individual transaction is actually not really succeeding. It's failing. And actually really what you need to do is think about this as a part of a program of transition. And so you need to be investing in, the takeout of fossil fuel facilities, and also at the same time investment in clean alternatives. You can't transition to things that don't exist, and it's actually looking at that. So we looked at the ETM from the Asian Development Bank and the JETP, which is the country by country, and both of those were thinking about programs and thinking about how do you connect the dots across all of those moving parts, and that's the way to actually engage people and get people moving in the right direction. So I suppose those were my two takeaways: education and sort of thinking of finance as in a portfolio way.
Thank you, John. I think, younger generation discussion said education of the high school kids is probably important. I cannot agree more. Okay, thank you. Hosen.
Thank you very much. Jan summarized the main elements of that just transition very well, and I do not really have anything to add, but I would like to share with you some of my own understanding about the just transition. And it's a great concept to talk and also develop further. But at the same time, I have asked myself, how much progress have we really seen with regard to the just transition? And then I recognize that we haven't seen a transition, not yet. So it's maybe too early to ask about any accomplishment with regard to just transition. And at that point, I realized that we do have a lot of different concept, understanding, interpretation of the just transitions. And I made a few comments about this concept of transition, and I still have the understanding that maybe I'm biased, that the concept of just transition sometimes misused or sometimes abused. And in many instances, I've found that it has become some kind of a catch-all phrase. So every abnormalities seem to be understood, or also seem to be addressed as an element for cure under the just transition. So I propose that we have a job to, we, community as a whole, to be more precise about the meaning of just transition. If we talk about just transition across the country, I think we are really touching on the impossible dreams here. And I don't have to really delve into why it will be an impossible task. Now, with regard to the what the ICEF would like to do for the next year, I believe Chairman certainly would like to ask that questions. And I recognize that our focus has been on climate change. That's good, but climate change. But at the same time, we all discussed that the Sustainable Development Goal, its progress has been quite lacking. And in fact, there was a precise data indicating how much society as a whole is failing in achieving Sustainable Development Goal. And it's not surprising to me to have those performance cards from the SDG Secretariat that we have been not succeeding in limiting the warming so far, and unless this warming is somehow managed by us, then we will continue to have trouble with SDGs. As you all know, climate change is known as a threat multiplier, and all those IPCC reports has been emphasizing so much about this increasing importance of this threat multiplier. So without any solutions coming from the climate change, forget about achieving those 16 goals of the SDGs. Climate change is one element of the SDGs, but it's more than just element of SDGs. Now, if we want to discuss the meaningful results for the climate change issues, I think we really should look into the SDGs, climate change in the context of SDGs. So in that sense, I would like to just briefly suggest a couple of items that will be useful for the next year's conference. I mentioned this already in other meetings. Circularity. Circularity of resources. I'm not saying just circularity of waste products, but circularity of everything. We depend on resources from the planet. So, and number two is nature-based solutions. We mentioned a couple of times here, but these nature-based solutions had direct relations with the SDGs. And third one is indigenous knowledge. One of the strengths of the recent IPCC reports is the clear recognition of the contributions that could be made by the indigenous community as well as indigenous knowledge, especially when the world will face increasing level of global warming. No matter what we do for the next 2 years, next two decades, climate change will worsen. So adaptation becomes very, very important. And there, our reports found that so far we have underestimated the great contribution that could be made by the indigenous community and indigenous knowledge. So with those three, I would like to share with you, all of you, for the next. And I'm sure you are going to ask me what sort of a specialist you want to invite.
Yeah, well.
And I thought of certainly not politicians, but I strongly recommend we need to have some inputs from behavioral scientists.
Thank you very much, Hosen. Yes, yeah, your advice is very, very valuable, as usual. Well, some kind of interpretation or just transition should be clearly defined. Some kind of discussion may be necessary, as you say. Asia, what is your take?
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed several presentations and discussions. And in general, I would say that anything truly constructive begins with intellectual honesty. And this is why I actually like this forum, because I feel that here is room for both hope and dreams, but also room for stating the cruel facts. For instance, I believe that Václav is very right in many ways. Net zero is far away, and there are many problems with renewables, and we can, of course, understand, because we hear it so many times together with word subsidies. Subsidies and subsidies, they are needed, and there is a question how to build a solid basis for this, and how to fight back poverty in these circumstances. I think the combination of cruel facts and hope and innovation is the best toolkit to build the future. And I very much enjoyed also that we don't have taboos here. We can discuss all kinds of things, including these difficulties. Perhaps it explains that my background is in politics, and I have attended several COP meetings, and I noticed that this climate case became very often very ideological, and there were areas of right wordings and right expressions, and then there were area of taboos and no-goes. And as my colleague here mentioned, adaptation, that was one example. It was taboo and it was not allowed to mention before 2006. And only when developing countries raised this topic, it was allowed to discuss. Earlier, it was something that mitigation was okay, but adaptation was giving away too much. I also enjoyed listening to young generation, and I think the question how to make climate less political was very wise. It has indeed become too political, and that is a little bit endangering the level of science. Freedom must characterize science, and not too many ideological constraints and taboos. So I want to thank very much for being part of this project.
Thank you, Asia. I know that you are the politician, main background is politics, so certainly your contribution is very, very useful, and I cannot agree more. The intellectual honesty is an issue here. So I'm very happy that Václav made a very, very strong argument about the risks and difficulty we are facing, and this kind of discussion should be open. And if we cannot really rebuttal what Václav said, there's no way. So I'm just wondering, this kind of discussion should take place in the forum like this. We should not go to too much of the climate fundamentalism. So we have to be open for any kind of discussion and try to get the conclusion out of it. David, congratulations for the very good roadmap for the AI, but what is your take?
The minister opened our session yesterday by saying innovation, innovation, innovation. And for me, the main takeaway of these 2 days is that innovation remains absolutely central to the challenges that we're talking about. And innovation is in our name here in ICEF. So I think we couldn't be better positioned to address this core challenge. Yesterday, we had a session on innovation in climate diplomacy and this new tool that's called the Global Stocktake, and talked about the impact that that's going to have. And then one of my takeaways from the very lively session we had with Václav and Michael and Ismail is we're going to need innovation to address all these incredible challenges that Václav was talking about. Without innovation, there's no way we can overcome the inertia in the system that Václav was talking about. And then most centrally, with the roadmap that we've been working on, artificial intelligence is a new tool that has the potential to disrupt almost everything. And there are a lot of people now who are saying that we are today, with respect to this tool, where we were with the World Wide Web in the early 1990s. And in the early 1990s, most businesses didn't have websites. And even by the mid-1990s, very few businesses had websites. But by 10 years later, you couldn't imagine a business not having a website. And today we have this tool, artificial intelligence, that allows us to, talk to a computer, engage in a conversation with it, which automatically interprets 100 languages, almost instantly. On Hosting's very important point about indigenous knowledge, I think the ability of artificial intelligence to translate between languages instantaneously is going to open up communication abilities with people that weren't there before and help us tap indigenous knowledge and other types of knowledge all over the world. So I think that that this forum should continue to embrace this topic and continue to talk about artificial intelligence and the implications it's going to have for everything we're doing. By the way, I think those implications could be both positive and negative. There's some very concerning aspects about artificial intelligence, its potential in disinformation. But we also need to figure out how to harness it for all of the good things that we want to do in fighting this challenge. And this is kind of a crazy idea, but in the spirit of innovation. You asked about speakers next year. I recently attended a session on artificial intelligence where a developer of one of these tools pulled out his phone and engaged in a conversation with the AI tool that he was developing, and a real-time conversation. And so maybe next year, as one of our speakers at ICEF, we could have an AI tool engaged in a conversation on clean energy innovation.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Very good point. Yes. We have to continue the discussion of AI, that is for sure. Ismail.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The group that I led dealing with the food, water, agriculture, and energy and soil and climate change nexus, that's by adding all the inputs there, came out with really a broad consensus among all the participants that the food and agriculture sector is by far the greatest consumer of water, of land, and transformer of natural landscapes. And it's giving us two amazing contradictions. The first one, everybody agrees there is more than enough food produced in the world to feed everyone on the planet. Yet, over 780 million people, more than 1 in 10, are hungry, and 3.1 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet, and over 200 million children die from malnutrition every year. And that while we had some advances on the SDGs in the last few years, it's been set back, according to most people, due to the 3 C's, the conflict, climate change, and COVID. But we said that the second contradiction, of course, is the one that I mentioned in earlier session, which is that this sector, which has enormous waste in it, about 30%, and which is contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, could become the primary or one of the primary means by which we can capture carbon and sequester it, because by working with nature, this is nature's best team to do that. And we've been talking a lot about the new innovations, but mostly in areas like energy and so on. And I think we haven't talked enough about the new innovations in biology, which enable us to tweak the DNA of different organisms and to get enormous results due to that. And that's something which I think we should do. For the next year, I would urge 2 general areas, Mr. Chairman. The first of these is finance. It is not useful, in my judgment, to continue to simply say every COP, everything, every time we meet, we need to do more of this, we need more adaptation, we need more, et cetera, more, et cetera. When, in fact, you have the entire total official development assistance is $200 billion. All the green funds together are producing $30 billion a year. The World Bank is producing 35 billion, et cetera. And we're talking that we need between $2 and $5 trillion. I mean, it's obvious that it's not going to happen. And I was delighted with the cartoon that showed all the little kittens and the ferocious lion. And if you keep adding kittens, you're still not going to get a ferocious lion. So I think that what we need to do really is to innovate in the financial ways of generating money, because we know that under private management, we have $480 trillion. So getting 2 to 5 trillion out of 480 trillion should not be impossible. I know that John and Moore and others are discussing that. So am I, with many other people who have a background in finance. And I think that this should be an area of innovation that is essential to facilitate the implementation of all the other areas of innovation that we talk about when we look at the challenge that we are facing. The second one is I'm going to say a very unusual thing. I was in a meeting in a committee I serve with for the International Science Council with James Cameron. He is the movie maker who produced and directed 3 of the 4 most successful movies in history. All of them over $2 billion in sales. And we asked him, and he is interested in science, that's another aspect, but we asked him, we said, look, you obviously know how to talk to the public. And we scientists believe that we have all the right answers. And yet somehow the conspiracy theorists and so on, the disinformation that is going around everywhere seems to capture people more. And he said something which I think is very important. He said, people like a narrative. You have to translate your findings in a way that can be communicated to the public in a narrative form. And that's why some people like David Attenborough and so on are very good at communicating some of these things. But it seems to me that this is perhaps one aspect that is missing when we discuss an innovation in new materials, an innovation in energy, an innovation in policy, etc. And somehow the narrative doesn't come together. So I would add the finance and that as being two contributions for next year.
Thank you very much, Ismail. Yeah, I think we need a financial lion, probably. And yes, I remember that Sir Paul Nurse made a very interesting statement about science and trust. So how make that narrative as a trustworthy is really the responsibility of the scientist. How we make these narratives. It's a very good point. Thank you. Let's go to Vali.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I'll follow on neatly from where Ismail has left off. But the first point I want to make is to comment on what Ho-Sang Lee said about the just transition. I think he makes a very important and useful point. You see, the concept of just transition has a very important and useful place in the multilateral political forums, where the poor countries can accuse the rich countries of being the carbon culprits and therefore they must now pay up, in simple terms. And that's an important multilateral political concept that will always be there, and the ministers from our governments in the poor countries will always be arguing that. But its real impact is going to always be very limited. So it's more of a political thing than rather a real material thing as far as I'm concerned. Because if you look at the actual amounts of money that has been committed on paper, which usually doesn't get paid. You know, at this multilateral forum, say they're going to contribute so much and so much, so many billions. Doesn't actually happen. But even what has been committed is very, very small, and it's not going to make any kind of impact. In my own country, for example, currently, and this is a thumbs up, there's probably about 10,000 megawatts of solar and new solar and new wind under construction currently, and all of that, none of that is funded by Europe or the United States through just transition money or anything of that sort. That brings me to, you asked us to comment on the session of Vaclav, and you said we should say whether we agree with Vaclav or we agree with Michael. I think, you know, Vaclav is a member of the steering committee and he's a colleague, so it will be very rude of me to say I don't agree with him. We must stand with each other, usually. But the point that the important thing that came out of that session for me is about finance. And also linked to the other session that we had where the young participant spoke about the innovative financing model they're looking at in Kenya. Now, Michael made the point that the huge advances in access to cell phones was linked very closely to innovation in how you finance it. And the big cell phone companies, their innovation on technology is equal to their innovation on financing. They are, you know, sometimes you wonder whether they are financial institutions or cellular phone institutions. The similar thing has happened with internet access. The world has internet access, and mainly through financial innovation about that. Michael made the point about motor vehicles in the past century. Motor vehicles the motor vehicle technology was very closely linked to how you finance them. So the kind of motor vehicles. You know, you could say that civil servants in a certain country earn between this and that, and for them to be able to afford a motor vehicle, it must cost such and such. So make a motor vehicle that's within that kind of price band, and that has driven. So, but when it comes to, so a lot of that has been finance-led. When it comes to renewable energy, I think there is a huge gap in the financial innovation. There's a lot of technological innovation, but there isn't financial innovation. And perhaps at the next meeting, we can consider having a session on innovation as far as financing is concerned, because the just transition is not going to pay for this in Africa and India and everywhere else. That if you take the phenomenal growth of the Indian economy and the phenomenal development that's taking place there currently, none of that is being paid for by the rich countries, by the way. You know, a lot of this is actually commercially led as such. So I think maybe we can look at as far as that is concerned. And then the final point, which maybe we can consider at future meetings, is look more closely at what kind of innovation is happening as far as off-grid is concerned. Because currently there's still a stranglehold of the grid connection question is having a stranglehold on things, and it shouldn't be so. And so maybe we may want to look at off-grid. For most of the world, off-grid is really the way to go. I just want to say finally, in the session which Ismail and I participated in on food and soil, I recommend to everybody to look at the presentation made by Dr. Ratan Lal. It is very, very interesting, and it makes one think why in the climate discourse, the question of soil and food and agriculture does not get the prominence that it deserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bali. Very good point. And well, that's right. Many people are supporting the issue of innovative finance. That's interesting. Naki, you have the floor.
Thank you. The first observation I would like to make is that I think it's fantastic that we are having this reflective session, and in particular in view of what David said, before we are all replaced by chatbots, AI chatbots in our place. So I think bringing the wisdom at the end of the meeting, I think, is really good together of what has happened. But I would argue first that we need to see this as a continuum. This is the 10th ICEF. And I think ICEF has been a cumulative process. It has been a learning process, and I think importantly also a community building process. So we have a big platform to build on, and I would argue, at least from my perspective, that this meeting was really one of the highlights. And our trademark, again quoting David, our trademark is really innovation. So we need to continue and deepen the topic, which reminds me of the big paradox of innovation, actually. Innovation can bring lots of good, and much of our prosperity is due to the innovation process, and yet it can also bring terrible misery and harm to people. It has both of these faces. So socially steering or collectively steering the innovation in the right process, I think, is a great contribution of ICEF so far. So that would be my opinion. Just to say, second point I would like to make is a little bit about our session on innovation for use of renewables. As usual, we ran out of time very quickly. In an hour, we covered gigantic area together with our co-chairs, all the way from resources, from conversion, renewable energy conversions to electricity, and also to hydrogen. And we even covered the point of the end use of energy services with the focus on lack of access, which I think is another key issue, and that I think in our session, since we talked about mobile phones here, the great success and the financing, how important it was. I would also like to highlight that in case of mobile phones, we should be aware that everybody in the world has one, even though 700-800 million people do not have access to electricity. It just shows how important this diffusion was. And part of the importance, I think, just add another factor, is that it's a granular type of technology, small-scale technology that can have very, very rapid learning rates. And this is why the financing could be also organized. So I think we have to think a little bit more in that direction. This is one of my conclusions of our session, and I would be interested to hear what the co-moderators think. In some ways, I think ICEF has contributed a lot in integrative thinking about the role of innovation, which I would argue is, like human creativity, not limited. So we really need to work on the explosive nature of innovation. But also, going back to what Husong said, I think we need also a more integrative approach. We have tried this. I mean, ICEF is exemplary in that, but still, the huge work is ahead of us. At the end of the day, we are talking about the SDG 7 on energy and SDG 13 on climate. We're leaving 15 SDGs out. I think this kind of holistic approaches are necessary. Even the SDGs are in some ways silos. And I see I'm taking too much time. Let me just make one small point. And that is that, one way of looking at this is the world has problems and we have compartments and silos. And I think ICEF can really contribute on this kind of positive way forward. What are the benefits of taking integrative solutions? So I think that could be one of the areas on which we could work. And then last, but certainly not least, I think that the roadmaps have been another great success, also at this ICEF, but also at the earlier ICEFs. So perhaps we also need to think about possible role of roadmaps in taking this kind of holistic integrative approach to future challenges facing humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Naki. Let's move to Kuroda-sensei, please.
Okay, thank you. As time is up already, so first I said ICEF is not international, intergovernmental, but innovation. So innovation is the keyword, and it's not only technology or science. It started as a policy, innovative policy making, and also we, as a co-moderator of renewable energy, we really have to think what is the acceptance by the local people, even for the new renewable energy, and that has some obstacles. So we have to deal with all these things. But science is changing, technology is changing so rapidly. You never thought about GPT-4, maybe a couple of years previous ICEFs. Now solar panel is improving greatly, and not that big scale, but someone is working on methane trap to change methanol at room temperature. There are many, many good, perhaps innovative science and technologies are going on. So we have to share the information, and we have to have innovation, not only in technology and science, but also society and policy and finance. So holistic approach is the key for the future ICEF, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuroda-sensei. Very good point. Yamaji-sensei, please.
Thank you very much. To me, this 10th anniversary ICEF is quite intense and dynamic. Dynamic is as usual, but more dynamic this time, I'm feeling. And also, on the other hand, I reconfirmed the difficulty of dealing with the uncertainties associated with climate change issues. The climate science has uncertainties, and scientists know that, but it's very difficult to communicate the uncertainty to public. So science uncertainty is very complex with many parameters, conditions. It takes time. Taking a long time is not good to communicate to the public. I used to think so, and I reconfirmed these difficulties. And another uncertainty is human factors, associated with human factors. Decision-making is up to human. decision-making or politics. But uncertainty related to human factor is quite different kind from uncertainty of science. It changes quite rapidly, and based on the not necessarily evidence or facts. One young schoolgirl make an action, then propagate all over the world. But that effect may be short. But the climate change issue, we are dealing with very, very long time frame. So how to maintain our effort for this long time involving every person in public person. So that is a rather pessimistic, my reconfirmation. But let me say another one. And in that sense, I should add, I'm quite sympathize with Professor Bartolomeo. I respect science, and I respect the data based on observation of such kind of thing. But this is another difficulty to communicate to the public. Okay, so then I rather move to our session. The name is Innovative Use of Renewables. I enjoyed really pretty much about the discussions. Particularly, I pointed out innovative use. What is innovative use of renewables? Not electricity power generation or connected to the grid. So there is a very interesting remark by a young German lady. She's doing NPO action in Africa. And she said, try to make solar system as a, how do I say?
Jukebox.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, yeah, paying for that service, that is feasible using modern digital technologies. It's quite impressive, and I always like ICEF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yamaji-sensei. George, what's your take from the aviation?
Let me start by commenting your first question at the beginning of this session. This lady in the Young Innovator session from Middle America asked the question to us, how could be the discussion less ideological? And I think Rita asked the same question. And of course, it's not time to give a complex answer, but I gave a very short answer. And this short answer runs like following. You have to listen both sides, the pros and the cons. And at the end, it is not important who has won the pro or the con side, but the best outcome of such a discussion, it would be if we move the discussion on a higher level. Because we have thought on both sides, and now we have understood the problem better. And the example is really the Smile and Michael session is a good example. We had seen two paths, pro and cons. And in conclusion, for me, the higher level of knowledge of this session, both speakers had been pessimistic. Smile had been pessimistic in terms of the development of renewables, and Michael had been pessimistic in terms of the development of nuclear and, I would say, backup technologies for nuclear. So at the end, the two had been pessimistic. So this gives rise to think more, what can we do against this pessimism? Of course, the answer is in this clear, more innovation. Innovation is the answer to pessimism. And this brings me to the session about sustainable aviation. We had not a discussion of pro and cons in this session, but we had a discussion about two examples of an early phase of market introduction of new technologies. Electric battery-driven planes and sustainable airline fuels, SAF. And it was very interesting to see in the discussion, the presentations, what are the developments in this early phase. Very, very, very interesting. And of course, at the end, you can come up with the conclusion, yes, we could be optimistic. There will be a further development. Of course, we need the government support. There must be the level playing field, but we can solve the problem. Maybe not as fast as we think if we want to have net zero in 2050, but we can solve the problems. And this is my conclusion of this meeting. And it's, of course, I think my conclusion, what should be done in the future sessions. If we have political sessions, we have sessions with pro and cons.
Thank you very much for your optimism. Then let's move to Mita-san.
Thank you, Tanaka-san. So, my reaction to, let's say, the conversations that took place at the session with Václav, and then later on the comments made by Dr. Lee, was it reminded me of a quote by an American journalist, Mencken, who said, "For every complex problem, there are clear, simple answers which are wrong." Now, I don't think that quote is appropriate here, but I would say what might be more appropriate is that there are clear, simple answers which are inadequate. Clearly, the problem of energy transition is complex. How do we transition a $100 trillion economy from fossil fuels to clean fuels is a complex problem. We know what needs to be done, and that was one thing that came through over the last 2 days. Technology is not going to be a barrier to the transition. Professor Chu, in the very opening keynote address, listed out 5 technological issues that needed to be worked on, but over the several sessions, everyone really was fairly optimistic about the technological initiatives that are taking place. The big challenge, of course, was that perhaps technology is not necessarily going to be the talisman that leads to speed and scale. And that is what we need, of course. We don't have time. We need to scale up the transition, we need to speed up the transition, or else we might go over the edge. And the problem that I think I'm finding, and again, I think this got reflected very well in these conversations, was that the institutional structures that the energy sector has today and the governance sector has established do not reflect hard realities. The reality that the energy market is now totally fragmented, that resource nationalism has now come to the forefront, that countries are introducing their own industrial policy in the backyard to increase capacity in their backyards. At the same time, to quote Jack Sullivan, they're raising high fences to protect themselves from competition. And there are distributional consequences of this energy transition, which was also being talked about. There will be winners and losers. We will, in India, not be able to remove the 1 million people who work in the coal mines without causing a political backlash. So how do we actually address that issue is, I think, the big question that I kept thinking about as I was listening to everyone. What may be required in our conversations next year is to not only talk about finance, which is critical, but also talk about how do we actually develop an institutional, a governance structure that begins to address these challenges, that helps the government decide who should benefit and who should lose. How do we distribute the costs and benefits of the energy transition? I think that this meeting was really, really an eye-opener for me, because as someone said, it was an intellectually honest meeting, and it was open. And the last session with the penultimate session with the young people, again, gave us hope. Now, I think this ICEF, Mr. Chairman, is a wonderful forum to actually translate hope into something that will be realizable. And we should try and develop our agenda to convert hope into something that is implementable, that will cover the implementation deficit that, again, one of our speakers talked about in the opening, on the opening day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mita-san. I cannot agree more that, I asked a question to the European ambassador, Piquet, that what is the, the European system of governance is certainly the way how the cost and sharing the burden among the different countries. So that's a model for the regional governance of climate change and energy security. Can we build the global one? This is another big challenge, and I asked the question to him that the global kind of climate, global organization, World Energy Environment Organization, some kind of global governance, new mechanism could be necessary, or could be our discussion point. But let's move to Sally. Congratulations for the fusion session you moderated.
Well, thank you. And like everybody, I have to say a few remarks first about the session with Václav. I think you are the topic of the day. So the way I looked at that conversation is that we have data, we have statistics, and you can look at that same information and the glass can be half empty or the glass can be half full. And in particular, I think the energy transition is going to be really hard. It's really complicated, but nevertheless, we have to do it. Or to use Marcia McNutt's words, it's easy to dodge responsibility, but it's very difficult to dodge the consequences of dodging responsibility. So this is something that we simply have to do, and what we've heard about speed and scale is absolutely right. So when I am in this forum, what I keep thinking is, well, how can we make this easier than it is? Because if it's going to be as hard as it is, if it's going to be like climbing, Mount Everest for the next 30 years, it's going to be too hard. So how can we make it easier? So I think the reality is not everybody's on board. So I think we have to find ways to get people on board and keep people on board. And part of that is not, the sort of very negative rhetoric for people who don't agree with your solution. So, we just have to change the way we talk about this. We need to build allies, and that includes having a very broad portfolio of solutions, which we've heard about. Second thing is, I just don't see how we're going to solve this problem. It's not going to be easy if we have to wait for every single individual to make a decision to buy an electric stove, to buy a heat pump, to buy a solar panel. So we need to really move to community scale actions, turnkey solutions. And certainly our markets and our institutions aren't designed to do that today. So we really need social and financial innovation so we can go into whole towns and communities and in one fell swoop do that electrification that we need to do. The other thing to make it easier, we need to start looking at pragmatic solutions, things that we can get done quickly, reuse infrastructure, decarbonize what we have instead of having to build everything from scratch. Because if we have to continue to the massive build out, often we'll hear like tripling, the amount of transmission, in the electric grid. That in itself is a massive undertaking. So we need to figure out ways to make do with what we have. And part of that is not letting perfect be enemy of the good. I mean, for example, we hear blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, we only want one kind of hydrogen or the other. The reality is anything that we can do to get to scale with hydrogen is going to help us. And I hear people saying, CCS, a false solution. Well, that may be the only solution. And if we are not willing to do that solution, we'll do nothing at all. So don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And then, of course, continue to innovate. So I led the fusion session. And it was fantastic. We had wonderful representation from all parts of that ecosystem. We heard about big government programs, supporting international collaborations to develop very large-scale pioneering facilities. We heard from government programs designed to encourage and support the development of startup companies. We heard about major energy companies who are jumping in and really making this part of a strategic investment to position themselves in the future. We heard about the vision, why it's so important to have plentiful, abundant, and low-cost, cheap energy. And we heard from a young innovator who has a startup company that was also on the panel. So, I think we're at an inflection point in fusion. We've been working on this for a long time, but there are many innovations which give me hope that this is the right time to reorient the program and really start thinking about building pilot test facilities within a decade, which will allow us to begin to get to terawatt scale over the next 10 to 20 years. So just to end with one thought, that there were a quote today or yesterday from Paul Nurse who said, "Trust is earned in teaspoons and lost in buckets." And to relate that to another quote of one of my favorite people, from George Shultz, who recently passed away. He said, "Where there's trust in the room, you can get anything done." So I think these very inclusive, open conversations are critical to getting trust in the room. And I think if we can have trust in the room, we can get anything done. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope that fusion may be a very good part of the answer to Václav's challenge. But Václav, not last but not least, I think you are the hero of the day, and I really enjoy your session. And I remember that in the preparatory session among steering committee members, how to structure this special session with Václav was a big issue. And who should rebuttal him? And this is a really, let's say, a tough discussion. And if, the other steering committee members cannot really convince Václav, it's the loss of the victories for the Václav, and we all lose against him. But the issue is not win or loss, but how to be open for the discussion of this kind of difficult issue. And Václav makes a very good comments in the steering committee all the time, but I really want to share his view with the audience. That is the reason why this session was made, and I'm very happy that this was a really good success and everybody talk about that. Okay, I'll give the floor to Václav. What your take?
I'm always amused why these things get personalized. It has nothing to do with me. I'm just a messenger. The old one, don't kill the messenger. We simply have not decarbonized at all. In past 27 years, we've gone up 60% up. That's a fact. It has nothing to do with me. And all I'm doing, I'm asking a simple question, which a 5-year-old child might ask. Daddy, in past 27 years, it was 60% up. Will it be so easy to go to zero in another 27 years? That's all I'm asking. And of course, it will not be easy. And it makes me very impatient when I hear these comparisons. I warn against categorical mistake, yet I hear that categorical mistake again and again. Oh, we got cell phones. 8 billion people got cell phones in 15 years. Why not decarbonize in 15 years? Well, introduction of cell phone didn't require to change how we make steel, how we fly, how we drive, how we build the houses, how we grow our food, how we do anything. Transition is a wrong term. It's not a transition. It's a transformation of everything we do in our society. Because everything we do in our society, 82% of today is dependent on fossil fuels. And getting rid of it will be a mighty difficult, long, and unpredictable task. And none of us can be so smart to say today, it cannot be planned. The governmental people are fooling themselves, think they could plan the trajectory, what we will do in the next 27 years. We won't. We will be always surprised. We will succeed and we will fail, but we don't know what the outcome will be. It's extremely uncertain. Some of you may know at least the name of T.S. Eliot, famous poet, although you may not read a single line, but T.S. Eliot said it well, you know. Humanity cannot stand much reality, and reality is difficult, very difficult, because it's the transformation of entire society, which I'm afraid cannot be done in 27 years. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. We have tried always, you know, but let's remember that we have not always succeeded. Frequently we fail as well. Thank you.
Does anybody want to rebuttal him now? David? You are the moderator of the session, so.
Look, I have enormous respect for Václav's perspective. I would make 2 points in response that give me some hope that we're going to be able to overcome some of the inertia that he's talking about. That doesn't mean that we can achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, but I think we can accelerate progress. And 2 points. First, I think we've seen in a lot of different areas that change is exponential, it's not linear. And I think we can see exponential change in a number of areas, you know, particularly once we get to the point where the alternative is cheaper than the incumbent. You know, it's amazing how capitalism works in this way. You know, there really is a step function. When something is more expensive than the alternative, it's not adopted. When something is less expensive than the alternative, it's adopted. And I think we have the potential for innovation to move us to the point where the alternatives are cheaper, and that will lead to exponential change. And then a second point, which is one we discussed in our session, and I defer to Václav's expertise on this, but I think that there is a difference between the 21st century energy transition and the energy transition that we've experienced in the past that Václav has written about, and that is that this one is more policy-driven than any other energy transition. That there have been policies played a role in the past, but the transition, for example, from wood to coal in 16th century England was not driven by policy. It was driven by the fact that there weren't enough trees in the vicinity of London, and coal needed to be used. This energy transition is uniquely being driven by a broad global consensus about the need to decarbonize. And not all countries, but a lot of countries, including the major emitters, have some very strong policies in place that are pushing decarbonization. So I think in that way, the past may not be a guide to the future.
Good try. Okay. Well, we have covered everybody. I raised some question to the panelists when I was moderating the session, is that the urgency of the issue is very well described in the discussion about the planetary boundary, which, the Rockstrom is very good at. He said out of 9 boundaries, like climate change, water, food, etc., health, 8 of them are already beyond the tipping point. So that means we don't have any time to really lose of not taking any action. So the sense of urgency could be, let's say, I don't say fear, but sense of urgency should be recognized in this kind of scientific or knowledge or data as such. What do you think? Do you have any view about the ICEF is taking up the issue of planetary boundary? Go ahead, Ismail.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I work with Johan on a number of commissions, and there's a slight distinction from what you said. He's saying there's an area where we consider it's very safe for humans to function in, and then there's kind of an intermediate area where we're getting into higher risk, and then a higher beyond that, when you've crossed beyond that, then you are at really very high risk. But the tipping points nobody can actually predict. The main point is that we don't know exactly what would trigger a tipping point and what even it would look like that would bring down a crash of a whole system. So that's just a slight rectification. But the other point that's important, I think, the definitional problem of how we stay within the safe areas is not very clear. We know that we should disrupt less than we've been disrupting, but how much less? and how much we would need to do in order to go back. One of the very few examples that he uses in one of his diagrams, is the ozone layer, which is probably one of the very few examples we have where there was a problem with the CFCs that were used as propellants and refrigerants that were knocking a hole in the ozone layer, and then the Montreal Protocol was signed and so on. And now the ozone layer is fixing itself, which is good. Now, I've been asked many times, strangely enough, Mustafa Tulba, who was Egyptian, and Omar Arini, who runs the Montreal Protocol, is also Egyptian. So we were having this discussion, and I pointed out that there was something very peculiar about that. The CFC is a very specific set of chemicals, and a number of limited companies. It's a small sliver of the economy, and the same companies that produce the bad CFCs also produce the good CFCs. So a little bit of money to those companies got them to change that, and that had minimal effect on our refrigerants and our propellants. This is not the case with the energy transition. As was said, it cuts across everything, from how we drive, how we heat our homes, practically everything, how we produce our steel, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that some of that will not work. The other problem was also in another area where we discussed, which I think is relevant to our discussions here, is that people have been now also trying to propose what they call mission-driven science. Examples being the Apollo moonshot and the atomic weapon in Manhattan Project, where you mobilize a lot of different scientists from different disciplines to work towards something, and you get an output. But the main point I would say, and I've said there in those fora at the UN against that, is that there's a difference between an output, which in this case is a device. In one case it explodes, in another case it takes a person to the moon and brings them back, and an outcome. If you're talking about I want health for all, I want to promote education, that is not susceptible. It's not the same as producing a particular device or an output. So I think that it requires, we need beyond the knowledge of the hard sciences, natural sciences, we need the insights of the social sciences and the wisdom of the humanities, because we need to act with human society, and human society as a whole, of course, has its own approaches to issues of governance and issues of inclusion and of that kind of question, which are not just straight technical questions.
Hossein.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go. Okay, thank you very much. Certainly it does, we should be aware of this planetary boundaries and also tipping points. But I also want to emphasize that we should also recognize the societal boundaries and the social tipping points. We have discussed here, analogy to for instance, our mobile phone, that change from landline to mobile phone. And during those periods, I have never heard about a just transition from landlines to mobile phone. Right, there was a tipping point there, societal tipping point, welcoming this transition to this mobile. Now, there can be many other such social tipping points. I believe one of the fast deployment of renewable technologies is also the result of societal tipping point involved there. Now, many people talking about, especially from the top of UNSG mentioned the global boiling, and IPCC never mentioned about global boiling, but somehow the communications people there turned our report into something communicating the global boiling, but I don't like that word at all. And now, urgency, very important, but what we do not know at this point is, as I said again, social tipping point, and also why people are reacting to this very imminent danger in this way. That is the reason why I suggest we better have some contributions, inputs from behavioral scientists next year.
Thank you.
Yes, I also want to comment on this. I'm working in the what's called Earth Commission, and Johan is the co-chair of Earth Commission, and our major objectives is, in fact, to understand a little bit better the transgressing of the planetary boundaries and the global commons, and that these are almost synonyms. Let me just give you a very brief summary of my position on this. If you look at the history of humanity, the last 10,000 years were the cradle of our development. Precisely because the Holocene, that period of last 10,000 years, has been very kind to humanity. The climate was stable, Earth systems were stable, and I think now we are in the position with the Industrial Revolution and last 50 years of acceleration that we are bringing many of these systems to a position that they would change their critical functions and therefore not provide services that humanity needs. So that's the danger. I mean, it's not going to happen tomorrow in some areas, yes, locally, but not globally. And the big uncertainty is inherent in this, but there are many, many scientific publications now. Also, IPCC has a section on tipping elements. So the question really is what Husong has said. How can we move the humanity to positive tipping in the human systems, in the social technological systems, to avoid this negative tipping of the Earth systems? And the real big danger that's probably in the future is a possible cascade, because this is all connected, so one can cause tipping of another. So I think this is the challenge we are dealing with.
John and Kuroda-sensei.
Yeah, I just wanted to, so we have looked at the boundaries framework when we started to look at agriculture and land use, and I suppose there are many elements to it. So it feels a little bit like, you know, we could reach out to new areas of scope to understand and add into the picture, but really on the climate question, it feels like implementation. It's sort of how to get massive system change moving, and we've heard about finance, we've heard about communication, we've heard about education. There was we had like lawyers, you know, on the stage. We've heard about governance. So it feels there's something about how do systems change and how do they change successfully and quickly. How do we get to those tipping points? And that's a sort of you know, intellectual discussion, but it's also practically how do we do it. We know a lot of the pieces. It's how do we put the pieces together to accelerate that change.
Okay, Kuroda-sensei, then Václav.
Okay, thank you. Because the latest planetary boundary was issued last year, 2022 last year, and before that, 2015 in science. What the big difference is the new material that is microplastics. It wasn't, it was a sort of gray zone. Now it's going to really red. We are already crossed the boundary. So it is changing, but from the beginning, the first one in nature, that the nitrogen and phosphorus was already crossed the boundary from the first issue. It keeps going, but no one is really talking about it. It's really strange, but someone said is this nitrogen and phosphorus issue is one of the reasons for the Arab Spring. Now Ukraine's conflict, same thing can happen, but somehow people all talking about biodiversity and climate change. So that is somehow, you know, we have to learn, we have to, what is the reason it's crossed the boundary? What is behind, not only science, but the humanities section as well. So that is, we do this ICEF in the perspective SDGs. I think it is very important part. Thank you.
Václav.
I want to enlarge on Ismail's point about the inappropriate comparison with moonshot and with developing of nuclear bomb. I was always kind of uncomfortable about this, but fortunately we have extremely good data about the cost of Manhattan Project and extremely good data about the cost of Apollo Project. And so I took these figures from US archives and converted them to $2023. The development of nuclear bomb, I'm rounding to the nearest 10, about $30 billion, okay? 30, 10 to 9. The moonshot, about 10 times, about $300 billion. Last year, McKinsey estimated that the global transition, nobody knows, of course, right? But McKinsey said about 300 trillion. So I applied to it normal 40% percentage for overrun in project in these decades. So basically, we are talking about $500 trillion as opposed to 300 billion for the moonshot. So we are 3 orders of magnitude differently. So again, it's unimaginably difficult task ahead of us. If you can imagine 500 trillion, by the way, global economic product is about $100 trillion a year. So we have to spend for 5 years everything, not eating, not moving, not breathing, everything for transition. So this is a challenge of, totally unprecedented measure, right?
Thank you very much. David.
I think Václav's making a really important point, and I guess it's my appointed role here to be the counterpoint to his pessimism. So let me just say another comparison here. When Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, he physically took different metals and materials one by one over the course of months and finally came up with tungsten as the best material. Today, we can have, with a machine learning tool, 1 million materials tested for various properties in about a second, and then refine that to develop the properties we want. So yes, this is an order of magnitude or several orders of magnitude more expensive than previous challenges, but we also have tools, including artificial intelligence and the web, which allows us to communicate with people around the world, which give us order of magnitude better abilities to solve problems than we did in the past. So that gives me some hope.
Yeah, can I just Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would add also that there is something stunning that we have to look at. The application of AI has enabled us to do the 3D visualizations of proteins, 200 million molecules in 1 year. It used to take 3 or 4 years for one molecule, for one student working at it. It's almost 1 billion years of student work was done in 1 year by the new machines.
George?
To David, I agree that artificial intelligence is really can be a game changer, which could be optimistic vis-à-vis the view of Václav. But the argument you put before, saying this transformation is good or better because it is the government-led transformation, I would just say the opposite. Example, Germany. I will not blame foreign governments, I will blame my own government. In the midst of the largest, most important energy crisis since 1979, the government shut down 3 nuclear power stations, which had been one of the most advanced, modern, safest technology, and the people have knew that they have to make operating coal-fired power stations, which had been shut in a complicated political process in the years before. So the result of this, what happened this year in Germany, is not a politics in favor of reducing CO2 emissions, but a policy in favor of augmenting CO2 emissions. And this is what is not, I believe, it's not only the government of Germany which is doing in case such stupid things. So it's better if the markets learn from artificial intelligence or from other processes or by innovation to solve the problem. We should not too much rely on the rationality of governmental behavior.
Yeah, well, sometimes it is called Gelman Angst, right? Go ahead, Matheson.
I just want to comment on your comments, David, if I may. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I wish I believed that you were right, but I'm afraid, sitting from where from where I sit in India, there are 2 things that make me skeptical about the points you've made. One is that the market doesn't function efficiently, so prices alone will not change social behavior. The price of renewables may come down, but that does not mean that there's going to be a wholesale shift towards, away from fossil fuels. Second is that, as I said in my comment, the world is raising all these fences. $600 billion are now subsidies in the US and EU combined for creating capacity in green energy, against $9 billion that have been allocated in India. There is no way that India is going to be actually develop the kind of green capacity to attract the investments required to build the capacity to make this transition at the pace of the speed and the scale that's required for us to actually contain and meet our net zero carbon target. So I'm just worried that Václav actually, if he comes to India and he makes this point in India, I think everyone's going to actually raise their hands in support of his point. And that, I think, because we all feel very nervous about the pace at which this transition is taking place. We can say what we want in public gatherings.
Thank you. We don't have much time, 5 minutes left, but I asked the question, about if we can take up the issue of geoengineering. Is there any view in favor or against? Ismail.
Yeah, I think...
just one word.
One word. I think that it would be useful to have someone from the National Academy of Sciences report on where their 5-year study has reached.
Okay.
They're studying the pros and cons of different kinds of geoengineering. It's a 5-year study. They've done about 2 to 3 years of it.
Thank you. Last but not least, maybe we will do the same thing as Andrew Fire asked the young people. If you are asked to advise your president or prime minister, what you are going to say for the climate change mitigation, just do it in 20 seconds or 30 seconds for each, starting with Václav.
I am very bad at giving advice. I have enough problem managing my old life. And I mean it honestly, I was never one to give advice to people. I'm not, this is about my pay grade.
Okay, I agree. Thank you very much.
Okay, keep on going. Don't give up.
I say decentralized power.
Make a consistent politics.
Oh, stay stupid.
Committed. Please keep committed to save our planet.
I would say science-based policies and avoiding conflicts and inconsistencies, what Georg said.
Okay.
I'm in a unique situation here that I chair the Presidential Climate Change Commission, whose job is to advise the president, and we do so regularly, and generally he takes the advice of the commission.
Good.
My advice would be go for science-based policies and evidence-based regulations, but above all, transcend the nationalism, because this is a global issue. You have to learn to work with everybody, including your enemies.
Who is your enemy, by the way?
Whoever.
Okay. Sorry.
We've been told, as correctly, I think, that in the global order right now, we're seeing different people drifting towards a new Cold War, even possibly. But fundamentally, I think we're talking about global problems that need global cooperation. And people have to be able to set aside political differences and so on, and to continue to work on these global issues above and beyond the short-term national interest.
Okay.
I would say as a political leader, you have the ability to not just shape policy, but also to talk to the public and to command the attention of the public. So use your platform, use your bully pulpit to talk about this issue.
Good, thank you. Ija.
Concentrate on science and facts, and don't let fear-mongering make you panic.
Good.
Be inclusive of technologies and resources as long as they are contributive to the carbon-free economy.
Okay. John?
I would say articulate a very clear strategy and stick to it.
Good.
Yeah.
Chanwa, what are you going to tell Xi Jinping?
Okay. The really, really positive thing from China is that we already have a really national strategy called 1+N. Decarbonization is already at the core national strategy to transform We set the targets, timeline, strategy, whatever already. This is really the biggest systemic change. So the only advice is that no matter what, how difficult the geopolitical situation China is in, just keep going, really deliver with outcomes there.
Thank you very much, Chanwa. Just time up, and I'm really happy that I hope all of us proven that we are young enough to compete with our young ICEF members. Thank you very much.